You were invited down here, sir, to talk about a project that you started out being very enthused about, what, a year ago?
No, not quite a year. It was, well, maybe, I guess it is, yeah, just about a year ago, February. February of this year.
And now, all of a sudden, you are less than happy with it. And that is the show that's on NBC Saturday nights at 7 called The Starlost.
Hmm. How the hell? I don't even know where to begin. It is, it's like going at a tapestry. Where do you begin? It is the most complex, ugly situation I've ever been involved in.
Why don't we start at the top and just kind of work through it chronologically and just see how a concept gets
Oh God.
translated or mistranslated?
Well, I'll try. But I have to make a couple of disclaimers at the outset. One, I have been warned by the attorneys at 20th Century Fox that if I persist in running my mouth, they're going to sue me. I have not been stingy in my bad rapping of this series, and particularly in Canada where it's being shot, and the columnists there have picked up on it, and it's gotten enormous, enormous play. I did an interview over the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Company, and they are furious. They're absolutely furious about it, and they keep screaming at me and telling me that they're going to sue, and I really would welcome such a thing because I think for once and all, someone ought to take into court the butchers and Visigoths and hold them up for close scrutiny because these people are lower than swine. They're the worst. So if at some points I say, oh, well, I better not talk about that, it's because I can't prove it. It may be so, but I can't prove it. I tried telling this when I just came back from a college lecture tour, and and everybody asked me about it, and I said, look, I'd rather not talk about it. It is painful to me in my gut, and it really is. But one evening at, I guess it was Bowling Green, Ohio, I decided I would tell it, and it took 2 hours to tell the goddamn story. So I'll try and encapsulate it for you. It began in February of this year, 73. My agent said, go over to 20th Century Fox and see a fellow named Bob Klein. That's Kline, Robert Klein. I said, what's his scam? He said, well, he's putting together a group of miniseries for the BBC in collaboration with 20th Century Fox. There'll be 8 or 9 episodes and like a novel for television. And I immediately thought of The Prisoner. And I thought, my God, what a tremendous way to go, where you could tell a story in 8 or 9 episodes and do it progressively and build the characters and come out with something really interesting. And Marty said, well, this Klein wants to do, among the series, one of them he wants to do is a science fiction series. I said, fine. So I went over to see Klein at 20th. Klein is a very smooth, slick operator. He is, he is a master of the Spiro Agnew no-speak. You will ask him a question directly, and he'll say, well, I'll get back to you on that. I'll get back to you on that. I walked in, and we began talking, and it became very apparent to me after a few minutes that while he was trying to butter me up with what a terrific human being I was, what a credit to my race, what great credits I had, how he knew about all my awards, all that bullshit, that what he really wanted was, and he called it this, the fugitive in space. And I said, well, that's a dumb idea. I said, the fugitive has been done and redone in 3 or 4 different ways. Talked about this fugitive in space thing, and I said, that's a really dumb idea. It's a very sterile idea. I said, how about this? And I popped at him an idea for a series that I had put together called Man Without Time, which was supposed to have gone on NBC, but that got messed up and didn't go. He thought it was too complex. Then I said, well, there are a couple of other ideas I've got. And he said, well, what are they? And I laid them on him, one of which was the idea of the enclosed universe. It's a very simple idea. It's the last remnants of the dead Earth have been put on a ship 1,000 miles long and have been sent out to the far stars. An accident has taken place 100 years after they take off. They have been locked in the ship. They do not know where they came from, where they are going. They do not, in fact, even know that they're on a spaceship. They don't know that they're moving through the universe. They think that the world has metal walls. Now, it's not a new idea. It's an old idea. It was the most popular version of it is Robert Heinlein's story Universe, which he included in his book Orphans of the Skies. But it was done long before Heinlein. It was done by Don Wilcox. It was done back in 1936. Heinlein did Universe in 39, and the story was written in 36 by other people. Most people think that Heinlein originated. That is not the case, but he popularized it. Since then, it's been done as Rite of Passage by Alex Panshin. It was done as what the hell's the name of it? Something Universe by Harry Harrison. I can't remember it. There's 5 or 6 major versions of this story. Well, he liked the idea. He thought it was good. And he said, why don't you go home and write that down, and so I can show it to the BBC. And I said, well, the Writers Guild does not permit me, which he knew very well indeed, does not permit me to write on speculation. I am not allowed to set anything down on paper. If you wish to pay me, I will set down a presentation which you can then market. If you want to pay me some holding money, we can do that. He said, no, we can't do that. There's no money yet, blah, blah, blah. And he gave me a fast ramadula. I said, well, then I'm just going to have to pass. And I started to walk. He said, well, wait a minute, hold it. And he opened his desk drawer and reached in, and this was the first indication of what sort of a human being Mr. Klein was, also what sort of a businessman. He pulled out a tape recorder, cassette tape recorder, and he said, why don't you talk it onto this cassette, just like you just did to me? I thought about it, and I thought, is this speculative talking or what? To tape it. I mean, I'd never seen anything. You see, the trouble with laws is they never keep up with technology, and the Writers Guild had never confronted this kind of thing before. So I took the tape recorder in the other room and tried to record it. Of course, his machine didn't work properly. So I took his cassette and I went home, and I recorded it there. Now, I get into shticks. I love doing bits. So when I start to tell it, as I just told it to you, with a little more detail, I put on the Sprague Zarathustra behind me, the 2001 movie. Boom, 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 the Starlost by Harlan. I did a whole big production. It was really ugly and fantastic. Now, I take it back to him, and I say to him, here is the cassette. You may use it to sell BBC, but you may not transcribe it. If you transcribe it, that will then make it speculative writing, and I will not have that. He says, oh, no, don't worry. Okay? I don't hear another word from him till sometime late in April, March, April, something like that. And I keep calling my agent. I say, what's happening with this clown? He hasn't paid me a dime. My agent says, hang in there. He's going to try and sell to the BBC. What I did not know was that the BBC had turned it down, along with a number of other ideas of his. They had accepted a couple, but they had turned that one down. They thought it was too expensive to do. By this time, Doug Trumbull had been brought in on the project. He and I were working at another project at Screen Gems on a sorcery series. And we wanted to use his new magic ham technique, okay, for the matting process. So Doug Trumbull was brought in on the project with his partner, Jerry Zeitman. Remember all these names, folks. Remember all these names. They figure prominently. I don't hear a word. Finally, I get very annoyed with my agent. I say, okay, find out what the hell's happening. So he calls him up, and he says, well, we've sold it. I said, fantastic. Now, part of the deal was he had promised me that I would go to London. I would be I would be the story editor. I would write some of the scripts and blah, 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 blah. Terrific production. It would be shot at the Lou Grade Studios, which are great studios. And I'm thinking, hot damn, I'm going to London, man. Go up to his office when I hear it's sold, and he says, yes, sir, we've sold it, and we're going to shoot it in Toronto. I said, what? He said, Toronto. I said, how can we shoot a BBC show in Toronto? He says, not BBC. It's going to be done on the Canadian television network, the CTV. I said, wait a minute, you told me England. He says, no, it's Canada. He didn't ask me. You understand, he had not paid me a dime. He did not own the idea, had no right to it, had already sold it, had already marketed it, and had not paid me a dime, okay? So I said, well, how did it get up in Canada? Well, we're going to do it in Canada, great facilities up there, you're going to love it, and he goes on and on and on and on. I said, well, Toronto is not London. Don't worry, says he, I'll get you to London. I said, terrific, I'll get to London. So we move on a pace. My mind grows dim as I think back on what the sequence was, but what the sequence was that what he had then done was transcribed the tape, which he had promised me he would not. That was his first breach with me. He had transcribed it and he had marketed it as a written presentation, which he had no right to do. When I found that out, I went sky high. But he says, well, we had to give him the words, blah, blah, blah. I said, how could you give them that? I said, it was absolutely illiterate. It was just me rapping, for God's sakes. It was a 12-minute tape of me rapping. I said, there was, you can't sell an idea like that. Oh, they loved it. I said, well, how could they love it? It didn't make any sense. I said, it made enough sense for them. Okay? So now it's going to be Canada, and I'm not happy about that. But I had written the series for Walter Koenig, who played Chekhov on Star Trek. He's a very close friend of mine. He's a brilliant, brilliant actor, marvelous, marvelous guy. He's also a writer. He's written a number of scripts, and he's really, really fantastic. And I wanted Walter to play the part of Devon. Except at that time I did not have the name Devon. I used a name, I don't know, Rick or something like that. It was because, when I rapped, I just did it off the top of my head. So, he then tells me that they're going to sell it on NBC to all of the NBC O&O stations. O&O means owned and operated. That's the independent NBC stations, right? In the 7 o'clock time slot that the FCC had given back to the studios. And I said, well, doesn't that make it won't it be a kind of a juvenile series if it's at 7 o'clock? I mean, I know how the network thinking goes on that. He said, no, we can do bold, forthright adult dramas. I said, okay, that sounds fair to me. Now, the guys from the O&O unit in NBC come out here. And he calls me up and he says, they want to meet you. They had bought the series on the strength of my name and Doug Trumbull's name, right? So they wanted to meet me. So I'm in company with Klein this one evening. We're going to meet them at his apartment in Malibu. And we are in company with a man named Preston Fisher. Fischer. Preston Fisher. Preston Fisher is a toady. 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 A slug-like creature who leaves a moist trail when he walks. Huh? Now, we are going up in the elevator. See, Preston Fisher is Klein's opposite number with 20th Century Fox in New York. He's the head of tape programming in New York. Klein is the head of tape production here on the coast. Klein is sort of the Svengali, and Fisher is sort of his Trilby. Very flat-chested Trilby. Anyhow, we're going up in this elevator, one of those glass elevators on the outside of a building, when they say to me, guess who we got for the lead? Albert Schweitzer, says I, indulging my gay and clever wit. No, say they, we got Keir Delay. I hit the emergency stop on the elevator button. The elevator cranked to a halt, and I said, you got who? You got what? Yes, we have Keir Delay. We saw him in Butterflies Are Free in London, and he was terrific. I said, the part of Devon is written for a peasant, someone who can sit on the earth with the dirt in his hands and cry if the need be. Keir Delay looks like he's been wrapped in saran wrap since the day he was born. I said, I don't want Keir Delay. Well, we need Keir Delay, blah, 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 blah. I don't want Keir Delay. Now, we're parked in this elevator halfway up the side of a building, and they're petrified of fear. I'm going to throw them right out a glass window, right? Because I'm running amok inside this elevator, and foaming and terrible things. And they say, we need Keir Delay because we've got to sell the whole package, and he's a big science fiction actor. I said, what are you talking about? Well, he was in 2001, so he must be a big science fiction actor. By their thinking, the incredible tunnel vision of Hollywood producers, there are only two actors who are science fiction actors. One of them is Keir Delay, the other one is Charlton Heston. Right? Of course.
What about Walter Pidgeon?
Green, he was in Planet of the Apes, must be a science fiction actor.
What about Walter Pidgeon? Asked John Henry.
What about Walter Pidgeon?
Or Gary Lockwood.
No, Gary Lockwood has no charisma. Gary Lockwood gets vicious. Keir Delay is very soft and gentle. He's malleable. He mumbles into his mustache a lot. Anyhow, so they say, we don't fuck this up. We got to have Keir Delay, blah, blah, blah. The network wants him. So I assume the network wants him, and I say, okay. Now, this is something else. You must understand that writers seldom get to talk to the network people. There's always some schlepper in between us, like Bob Klein or Preston Fisher, that's F-I-S-C, anyhow, who do all of the talking, and they interpret everything, and they interpret it to their own ends, you dig? What I did not know was that Preston Fisher and Keir Delay were very close friends. Now we get up into the apartment. Doug Trumbull shows up with Jerry Zeitman. You remember them. The happy dancing duo. And after a little while, in come these very tall, elderly gentlemen from Toledo, Ohio, or Dayton, or something like that, from some NBC station, wearing very sincere gray suits, earnest ties, and honest white shirts. They sit down, and I immediately begin to hit it off with one of the guys. He's kind of cool, and we kind of like each other, and he's grooving on me, and I'm grooving on him, and we're talking about what a cesspool Dayton is and things like that. And as I've often said, if they were going to give an enema to the United States, they would put it in the tube at Dayton. Anyhow, we're talking along, and he's happy with me, and he thinks I'm going to do a good job, and I'm telling him what the series is going to be and how nice it's going to be and all like that. And then he says, "How do you feel about Keir Dullea?" There is a hushed, awesome silence in Bob Klein's Malibu apartment, and Bob Klein turns several shades of ochre, white on white face, and I say to this gentleman, I say, whose name I cannot remember right now, he's a very nice man. I said, "Do you want a politic answer or an honest answer?" He says, "I want an honest answer." They always are going to say honest answer, right? I mean, they're used to being lied to, but they will always say, "I want an honest answer." So I said, "Frankly, I think Keir Dullea sucks." Now, Bob Klein gropes for the digitalis. Preston Fisher melted into a soft puddle of jelly, oozed under the little nut cups on the table. And he says, "Why do you think that?" So I told him. He says, "Yes, I agree with you. I think he's much too..." We compared notes, and it seems that Keir Dullea had only played psychotics in movies, you know. What Happened to Bunny Lake, or Bunny Lake is Missing, whatever it was. David and Lisa. In Butterflies Are Free, he was blind, right? And in 2001, he had about as much character and charisma as, say, a bowl of Rice Krispies, right? Old Rice Krispies. So he says, "Yes, I quite agree. Who do you see in the role?" And I said, "Walter Koenig, Robert Blake, Bobby Blake from In Cold Blood." I named a couple of other people. He says, "Yes, yes, oh, he would be terrific." Now he gets very excited. And he says, "Let's screen test those people, too," to Bob Klein. And Bob Klein says, "Oh, yes, yes, of course, we will. Now, what I did not realize, and I cannot prove this, but I would be willing to bet every dime I have in the bank, and it is considerable at the moment, thank you, that they had already made a commitment to Keir Dullea, and they were stuck with it. And there wasn't any way we were going to get anybody but Keir Dullea. Yeah? So, we end the meeting. They go away. Klein says to me, "Boy, you really threw me a curve." This is no more of a curve than you threw me coming up the elevator. I says, "Don't arbitrarily and unilaterally decide something and then expect me to be your slave about it." I said, "Because that ain't where I'm at. I'm the creator of this particular dream, Jack, and I'm willing to make you a couple of $1 million, but you got to honor my creation." Well, that was only the beginning of the end. I also advised him at that point, this was in April, May, something like that the Writers Guild strike was about to come down on us. And if it came down on us, I was not going to write. No way. Well, we'll work around it. Don't worry about that. We'll take care of it, says Klein. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. Everything will be all right. Blah, 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 blah. He always does that. I said, "Okay, but be advised, I will not write." Writers Guild strike starts. Bob Klein, at that point I still had not gotten any money. This is now like 3 months into the goddamn project. He sold it to something like 48 NBC outlets, sold it to the entire Westinghouse network, sold it to the Canadian television network, sold it all over the place. Sold this goddamn thing on the strength of a 12-minute cassette. They began doing ads. They didn't even know what the ship looked like. They made it look like a big bullet. Now, you know, nobody has made a rocket ship look like a big bullet in 12, 15 years. Everybody knows they look different. They did this goddamn poster. It was so stupid. I could not believe it. Then the Writers Guild strike started. Then began a tale of terror, subterfuge, and horror, unequaled since Clifford Odets' The Big Knife. I mean, I've been out here 12 years, man, and I have worked for some of the sponge balls of the universe. People who couldn't get their asses arrested on Skid Row. I have worked for them and been screwed by them, and even they did not sink to the levels that I was forced to work on. They began threatening me. Now, I will not accuse Mr. Klein of any of this. Mr. Klein, I'm not accusing you. Don't get your goddamn attorney's bowels in an uproar, Mr. Klein. Unnamed parties began threatening me, right? I better write. I damn well better write. There was a lot of money tied up in this. When are you going to write? Are you going to write? Let's have the treatment. We need a treatment. They needed what they call the Bible. The Bible is the presentation of the series that outlines the characters, outlines the physical plan of the ship, outlines the direction the series will take. It is, in fact, the blueprint, the template from which they make the entire series. They did not have this. All they had was this fakakta 12-minute tape, which they had transcribed and made no sense at all. What I also did not know was that other people, including Mr. Preston Fisher, that's FIS, and had been writing explanations of what I had said on this tape to send around to people so they could promote it. And they had used the dumb name that I had for this character. I don't remember, Vic. Oh, Vic it was. Yeah, Vic. He gave me a name, Vic Deluzio or something, some crazed name like that, and this was going to be the hero, right? They didn't know about the character named Garth. They didn't know about Rachel. They didn't know any goddamn thing because it was all in my head, and I wouldn't tell them because the strike was on. And they were writing all of these nitwit things and sending them around as though they were the word. So people were programming it and announcing it. Vic Deluzio discovers the universe. Christ, they began working all kinds of crazy numbers on my head, man. They would start calling me at 2 and 3 in the morning. Where is the Bible? We've got to have the Bible. And I would hang up on them. I tried going out of town. They tracked me down and found me, harassed me, drove me crazy. One day, a party whom I will not name calls and says, we'll give you $12,000, goes into an unnumbered account, no taxes, no, it's not on your contract, just 12 grand, just get us that Bible. You don't even have to bring it to the studio, you can leave it at a Denny's, we'll find it, put it in a bottle and throw it into the ocean, we'll get it. They wanted to meet me out in Tustin, some goddamn thing like that. Say, come on, get out of here, you bunch of creeps. They all thought they were Howard Hunt, right? So, get this one. This is beautiful. One day when I was in Klein's office, I was looking at the Screen Actors Directory, and I saw a picture of an actress that I kind of had eyes for, and I began doing some of my rooting, grubby, sexist routines, salivating and making ugly remarks about her gorgeousness. One afternoon, the doorbell rings at my house, and I open the door, and there she stands, young actors, and I said, hi. And she said, I happen to be in the neighborhood, and I've always wanted to meet you. Now, in the neighborhood, let me tell you, folks, I live on the side of a mountain. I want you to know that the Altadena man, to deliver my milk, has to wear crampons. That's what I want you should know. In the neighborhood means like she was dropped by a dirigible. Okay, she happened to be in the neighborhood. And she came in, and it did not take me long to realize who had sent her and to what end. How much they had to pay her, I have no idea. But in one of the great moves of purity on my part, which I have regretted ever after, I sent the young lady away. It went on that way for weeks and weeks and weeks. Finally, they tried to get around it by, they tried a number of things. They figured if they could get a Canadian writers to write it, they would be cool. Because the Canadian writers were not on strike, although we had a reciprocal arrangement with them. The Canadian writers were not on strike. And they said, it is not an American production, it is a Canadian production. It's being done by Glen Warren Productions in Canada, owned by Ted Delaney, and it's being done at the CFTO Studios in Toronto, blah, 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 in connection with the CTV. Well, I didn't believe that. I thought it was an end run on our strike, and they were trying to get around it and get something in production, which I proceeded to tell the Writers Guild. So they said, no, it's a Canadian production. It really is an honest-to-God Canadian production, and so you can work for us. I said, I cannot work for you. My guild says I cannot. So they then figured if they could get Canadian writers to write it, everything would be cool. Well, the Writers Guild down here, the WGAW, sent up word to the Canadian Writers Guild. You see, it's getting more complex as we go along. I want you to know that. It gets even more complex from here on. So keep all of these things separated in your heads. The Canadian Writers Guild is called ACTRA, A-C-T-R-A. ACTRA, unlike the Writers Guild down here, is composed of not only writers, but actors as well. And we all know about actors. Anyhow, they figured if they could get Canadian writers to write, they could get it into production, okay? Because they now had delivery dates barreling at them and no product. Not only no product, no Bible. They didn't know what the hell they were going to produce. They couldn't build sets. They couldn't hire actors. They couldn't do anything. And they couldn't get anything out of me. I was a thorn in their side, and they hated me. They would call me, odd hours, people would call me up and just curse, just idly curse. Yeah, dirty huh?
Are you sure they were all those calls were connected
No,
with
they were
this?
probably Jesus freaks still responding to my last story on this station. Anyhow, Klein began calling me, telling me that ACTRA was going to accept this production as a Canadian production. If they did, then Canadian writers would be put to work and I would be required to go to work. And I said, well, if ACTRA accepts it, then I will have to think about that. That'll make a different kettle of fish. Because I knew very well ACTRA would not, because ACTRA had a reciprocal agreement with the Writers Guild down here, and they were just not going to bust the strike, okay? They couldn't get Canadian writers to write for them, so they now could not get anybody to write for them. Now they call me and say, we're going to bring in scab writers. And scab writers will do your Bible, and it'll be their idea. And I said, fuck you, I'll pull back my whole series. I said, you don't even have a contract with me. I haven't even signed the contract. You can't pull it back. We'll sue you. It's a common idea. You told us so. I said it's a universal idea in the science fiction genre, but it's clearly my series. You try and produce it, I'll sue you. Well, by the time you sue us, we'll be on the air. I said, okay, go ahead, do whatever you want. I don't give a damn. I didn't want to talk to them. I went to New York. They found me in New York. Had a meeting there with them. Called the Writers Guild and said, I'm in this meeting. They said, get out of that meeting. I left the meeting immediately. Left them sitting, where are you going? I'm leaving. Why? My guild says I can't stay here. Right? I was a very good guild member. I was on the council. I was on the board of directors of the Writers Guild at that time, right? So I had to be above reproach. Okay. One day on a Sunday, late in a Sunday, I had to call a writer whom I will not name, science fiction writer whose name you would recognize, who lives in San Francisco, about a story he had had in my anthology, Again, Dangerous Visions. I had to call him about something or other. We were trying to sell it as a novel. Got a hold of his wife. I said, hi, where is he? He's not here. Where is he? Well, he's down in L.A. Down in L.A. What's he doing down there? Well, he's on assignment. Now, he writes for Rolling Stone occasionally. And I said, oh, is he on assignment down there? No, he's writing the Bible for your series. The hair crawled up the back of my neck. I said, he's doing what? Yeah, he's been down there since Friday night. They called him, rush job, blah, 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 blah. I get the name of the hotel from her, and I call him. Discover him there. He sounds very sheepish when I call. I say, what the hell do you think you're doing? Well, I'm pulling your chestnuts out of the fire, aren't I? I'm saving your series. Because if we don't get this, it won't go on the air. Isn't that right? I said, yes, that's right. And I don't care. He says, well, they wanted me to write. Now, what had happened was this. Preston Fisher, Fischer, right. Preston Fisher, a couple of years ago, had tried to get on the boards an off-Broadway production composed of 3 science fiction short stories, one of which was Tom Godwin's The Cold Equations, one of which was a thing by Bob Silverberg, the third of which was my own I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Never got off the ground. Bob Silverberg did the adaptations. Preston had become, not friends with, but acquaintances with Silverberg. Now, when he couldn't get me to do it, he knew he needed a science fiction writer. He called Bob from New York to San Francisco, where Bob lives, Berkeley, Oakland, and he said, we need somebody to write this thing. Now, Bob, who has been my friend for 20 years and is very, very sharp, says, what about Harlan? Why isn't Harlan writing it? Well, he's on strike. Oh, would Harlan want me to write this? Well, now he knows Bob is going to call me. Well, no, I don't think so. Well, if Harlan doesn't want me to do it, I pass. Now, this is a lot of money he's talking about for about 72 hours work, but a lot of money. They were offering big bread because they needed it fast. So Fisher says, well, if you won't do it, do you know someone else who might? So Bob, who's got, one of those great antic senses of humor, says, well, Papa Dow doesn't like him, right? And why don't you call Papa Dow and see if maybe he wants to do it, because he and Harlan have been on the outs for a couple of years. So Preston Fisher, like the vulture he is, the carrion bird, calls Papa Dow, and he says, hey, how would you like to make $2,000 over the weekend? Now, Papa Dow, as you can see, I'm not using his real name. Sidney Papadow is not his real name.
Clifton
Papadow is his real name. Well, I may be skipping some things in here, and later on I'll go back and I'll say, oh yeah, and this was also happening, but this is pretty much the way things were going. Around this time, I had stood up at a Writers Guild meeting because we were on strike. We had been asking for a strike vote. And I said, I got a series that's supposed to go on the air, and if we go on strike, it ain't going on the air, and even so, I ask you to, strike. So, I was kind of a rallying figure, which was really, heroic as hell. And so I was very involved in the guild thing. So I said to the scab writer, I said, man, what you're doing is you are strike breaking. There are men and women out pounding the goddamn bricks every day. They get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to be out there when the studio's open in the rain. This is an important strike. We've been, we're really going for some important things here. This is not a matter of money. This is a matter of getting some rights for writers that they have long needed. And I said, would you come over to the house and talk to me? He said, yes, he would. He said he had been writing for 72 hours, and he had just finished a 60-page outline, a whole presentation, outlining characters, blah, 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 the whole thing. He had put together the series based on my 12-minute cassette, right? So already, they're screwing me around. Now, at this point, I dislike these people so much that I want the series to die. I don't want it to go on the air. I'm killing for myself maybe $250,000. Okay? So, he comes over to the house, and we sit and we talk for 6 hours. And I really laid it on him. I said, you cannot hand this thing in to them. If you hand it in, you are going to be fucking over everybody in the Writers Guild. You must not do this, man. You must not do it. He says, well, I don't know. I said, look, let me take you into the Writers Guild tomorrow and talk to Mike Franklin, the director. Talk to him and you'll understand. So, he said, okay. Next morning, and he locked into the trunk of his car the 2 copies of the Scab Bible. Okay? Next morning, we have breakfast, and while I'm in his room, waiting to take him to the Writers Guild, I said, I'll prove to you that these people are liars and cheats and thieves. He said, how? I said, I will call Bob Klein. Bob Klein's the guy who had hired him. Preston Fisher and Bob Klein. From his hotel room in the Beverly, whatever it is, over on Pico there. I don't know what it's called. Something or other, the Beverly douchebag or something. I call Bob Klein. Papa Dow is listening in on the phone in the bathroom, right? You can tell it's a Hollywood motel. There's a phone in the toilet. He's listening on the line, and I get Bob Klein on the phone, and I say, hi, Bob. Hi, Harlan. How you doing, Bob? Well, we're not doing good, Harlan. Where's the Bible, Harlan? Well, Bob, you know there's a strike on. Well, I know, and we don't want you to write. What? No, we don't really want you to write. We want you to be honest and straightforward and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, Jesus, Bob, I'm glad to hear that that's the tack you're taking. I said, listen, I'm kind of worried. Are there any other writers writing on this series? I said, Bob, are there any other writers writing on this series? Let me put it this way, Bob. Are there any other writers currently writing on this series? No, there are no other writers writing on this series. There are no other American writers writing on this series. I said, oh, are there any other Canadian writers or Latvian writers or Israeli writers or anybody writing on this series? No. You mean there's no one else doing any kind of a Bible or a script or a presentation? No, we're waiting for you. We're going to keep faith with you. No one is writing anything. Thanks, Bob. Good talking to you, Harlan. Bye, Bob. Hang up. Bob Dow comes out of the toilet. We look at each other. I say, I rest my case. He says, let's go to the Writers Guild. We go to the Writers Guild. Mike Franklin sits and talks to this dude for a while. He then turns over to me one of the 2 copies of the Scab Bible. He takes the other one with him and he goes back to Berkeley. Right? Now, all that day, Preston Fisher, Bob Klein, and Jerry Zeitman, Trumbull's partner, are going bananas because they can't find the guy. They put him up in this motel and they can't find him. Where is he? Finally, they get a hold of his wife, and she says, well, he went to see Harlan Ellison. That's it. They call me, what did you do with him? What did you do with him? I said, I killed him, cut him apart, and I ate him. They begin screaming at me and yelling, you son of a bitch, you son of a... They're going out of their minds, because no matter which way they turn, there I am, like an ominous specter in their lives, and they don't know what to do about it. They know that they can't beat me any other way, so they then go after ACTRA. And what happened was this. I presume what happened was this, and I was duped too. Now, I had not written a word up to this point. ACTRA is composed 90% or 70% of actors, 30% of writers. Writers in Canada are a very small group. They are very limited in what they do because they have never had any big productions up there. And anybody who gets really, really proficient comes down here because the money is much, much better. Because, you see, there's a smaller viewing audience in Canada proportionally, so they pay less money. Anybody who's any good comes down here. So they went to work on ACTRA. A man named Paul Siren, who was the director. And apparently they got to the actors. And they said, if this series opens up for you, it will have to meet what they call Canadian content standards, which means 98% of everything on the series has to be Canadian. Canadian actors, Canadian directors, Canadian writers, Canadian producers, Canadian production staff, everything Canadian has to be. They can have like one American actor and one regular and one guest star. They can have one American writer. I was to have been the American writer, okay? Now the Canadians see all of this work and they start pushing. The actors start pushing, we want these jobs, right? Actors would sell out their mothers for a dime. Anyhow, so pressure keeps being put on ACTRA. Pressure keeps being put on. I keep getting calls and telegrams from clients saying, ACTRA accepts it. ACTRA accepts it. I said, I haven't seen any such indication. He says, I'll send you a copy of the telegram. What he sends me is a Xerox of something that he typed up in his office. I said, this is no proof. And what it said, one of them was, ACTRA thinks that it may be a Canadian production, and if it is, then they will not honor the Writers Guild strike, and they will put Canadian writers to work. Now, the minute they put Canadian writers to work, they'll come up with a scab Bible up there, and they'll begin doing segments, and it doesn't matter whether I'm on or off. But that's not the point. I would still, ethically, I would not go anywhere near it. Anyhow, finally, after many weeks and much aggravation, they convince ACTRA that it is a Canadian-produced production that is being deficit financed by CTV, that it's being produced at the CFTO studios, that the people putting up the money are Glen Warren Productions, Ted Delaney, and that the only connection that 20th Century Fox has with it is as distributor down here in America. Okay, they start laying that on me. Now I'm getting in my head a little crazy. I figure, well, maybe it is Canadian because all of this information is coming out of Canada. And I say, well, if I get the word from ACTRA, then I will accept it. Telegram comes through. ACTRA accepts Canadian validity of this series, The Starlost. Canadian writers will be put to work. I still didn't believe it. I had my agent, Marty Shapiro, call Paul Siren at ACTRA in Canada, in Toronto, or Ottawa, wherever it is. Toronto, I guess. And I listened in. And by God, he said, yes, it is a Canadian production. We have satisfied ourselves that everything is Canadian. That the only connection 20th has is in distributing it after the fact, after it's played on Canadian television first. So I figured, okay, I am ethically now bound to go to work on it. It's a Canadian production. Called the Guild and told them. Don't do it, they said. I said, well, they didn't really say don't do it. They just said, we would rather you didn't. I said, well, I have to. I now have to go. No, don't. You'll be brought up on charges. I could not believe that they would bring me up on charges, man. I mean, I was on the board of directors. I was a staunch militant, guild man. I was all for the strike. I'd have gone out and I'd have wee-weed on Lou Wasserman's building if they'd asked. I'd have done anything. Had to go. I had to write. They needed the Bible. I sat down and I wrote the Bible. Good Bible, too. I said to Klein, I want you to promise me that the scab Bible will not be used. No one will see it. Footnote, I later found copies of that goddamn thing all over the place. And it was filled with, even Babadow, who had written it, hated it. And it was filled with androids and a guy who was half robot.
Hold it, back off for a second. The guy in Berkeley who wrote it, this was the chap that you had talked to, who had listened in when,
right.
What's his name, said there are no other writers in the thing.
Right.
He had talked to the Guild said no, he had tentatively agreed.
Right.
He went back north, and he took the one copy with him,
right.
Xeroxed it or mimeoed it, and that was it.
Right. Except, what I had said to him was, don't turn it in. If you don't turn it in and they don't pay you, I'll pay you the $2,000 out of my pocket, which he thought was cool. See? But they did get a copy of it. Whether they got it from him or from, I don't know where, but they got a copy. And they Xeroxed the hell out of it, and it was all over the place. And it was full of erroneous, awful stuff. They also didn't pay him for a long, long, long time. They were always late paying everybody. Now, up to this point, I had not seen a dime either. Right? Already they're talking about producing this goddamn thing, and they haven't paid the guy who thought it up. So I did the Bible, and I handed it in. Good Bible. Now, I'm skipping over a lot of little screwing arounds here that went on. of lies that were told, of this, of that, the other thing. Now, I say I want Walter Koenig to play the part of Garth. I created the part of Garth to be this peasant who could sit on the earth and cry, and they said, well, we may have to cast a Canadian writer, a Canadian actor. I said, I'm sorry, man, I want Walter Koenig to play this part. That's who it's for. It's contrast to Keir Delay. Well, we'll see. We'll talk about it. Like when you were 10 years old and you want to go to the movie, your mommy said, we'll see, right? You never got to go to the movie. So, I go off to a writer's conference in Michigan. While I'm there, they're calling day and night and day, day and night. You got to go up to Canada. You got to go up to Canada to write these scripts. We need the first script. You got to go up and work with the writers. You got to go interview writers. You got to go up to Canada. I said, I got things I have to do. You got to go up there. You got to go up there. Blah 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 blah. One of the things. I'll tell you what kind of people they are. They call. It was a writers' conference in the woods, way up in the forest. They call the director of this place at 3 a.m. He's asleep in bed. They say to this dude, we got to reach Mr. Ellison. Well, it's 3 a.m. here. Well, we got to talk to him. Well, he's about a half a mile away in the woods. Well, could you run over there? He says, yes, I could run over there. I could also walk over there. He said, but I don't intend to do either. Fuck off. And he hung up on them. Right? They called back. They had no shame, no mercy. They wouldn't let me alone. Finally, I agreed when I got out of there, I would go directly to Toronto, and I would spend 10 or 12 days there working with the writers. Long story short, got up there, find that they have appointed a producer. A man who knew nothing about science fiction, but I mean nothing, and knew little about television. His sole credit was that he had been producer on a series called Adventures in Rainbow Country, which had lasted, I think, 26 minutes and had died. There are now all kinds of people with their fingers in the pie. CFTO Studios, Glen Warren Productions, CTV Network, NBC, 20th Century Fox, Bob Klein, Ted Delaney, and they all are going at me at once because they all want to get in the act and they're all grabbing for the money, right? They put me in a miserable little hotel room. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's not... As they will be quick to tell you, it was an elegant hotel room at the Four Seasons Hotel, which is the biggest hooker haven in Toronto. Xaviera Hollander was there. I swear to you, Xaviera Hollander was there with 3 teenage hookers, and she was having large parties with Japanese transistor salesmen all the time I was there. But did I get to get laid? No, I didn't get to get laid because I was busy writing. At about this point, or a little earlier, I had insisted that they hire Ben Bova, the editor of Analog magazine, science fiction magazine, as the technical consultant on the series because we needed a science expert on it because I'm not that hot on that. And Ben had been hired earlier, and Ben had come out to L.A. and had worked with me on putting together the ship. And we decided it should look like a bunch of grapes, and each grape was a biosphere 50 miles in diameter, and on and on and on. Tim Kirk did the illustrations for the Bible. They were really great. Bob Klein didn't like the drawings. He said, I don't like this guy's artwork. He liked better the big bullet. The big bullet he liked a lot. So, now Ben was supposed to come up to Toronto to work with me and help me with plotting out the stories. Because I found that what was happening with the Canadians was that they were nice people, but that they had never written episodic television and they didn't understand. Forget not understanding science fiction. I mean, they just had no idea. They would come up and one person suggested a story about giant ants. Another one said, how about the last 2 people left alive and they call each other Adam and Eve. Honest to God, they said these things to me. They set me up meetings with people. I met 24 writers in 12 and a half hours, 13 hours, a half an hour each. And I had to go on my gut instinct about who could write and who couldn't. And I'm feeding them ideas, and And one guy will say, how about a talking plant? And I said, well, no, not a talking plant, but how about this? And I go, blah, 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 and my mind was really working. And I'm plotting out stories as I go along. And I'm sending them out and saying, why don't you go out and, set that one down on paper. Now we find out that what they've decided to pay the writers, well, let me put it to you this way. The old top of the show for a 1-hour television show in Hollywood was $4,500 to $5,000. Now it's something like $6,000, $7,000 since the strike, okay? You know what they were going to pay for a full script, treatment, first draft, final draft? Take a guess how much they wanted to pay the writers on that show.
$1,400?
$720.
What?
Mm-hmm. $720.
10% of the standard U.S. of the right.
Now that's low even for Toronto. Very low for Toronto. I mean, Canadian rates are lower, but they ain't that low. Called them up, and I said to them, either you up the money or I walk. Now this dude that they had hired as producer, Bill Davidson, that's the one good thing he did. He stuck that fight out too. He said he would walk off the series too. And they went back into consultation, and they came up with $2,750 is what they pay for a script on that show. $2,750 for a 1-hour script. Isn't that unbelievable? Anyhow, the writers were nice people, but they just couldn't cut it. And I could see what was happening, and every day up there was a fight, trying to explain to these people, trying to explain to Davidson, trying to explain to the people of the CTV network. Ted Delaney, who was the head of Glen Warren Productions, who was the producing agent, never called me, man. I mean, here I am, the guy that's going to make millions of dollars for him. It's my idea, my series. I'm brought up. I own a piece of it. I'm a partner of his. He never called. He never said, welcome to Toronto. He never said, would you like a cup of coffee? Nothing. Never talked to him. Never saw him. The utter disdain and disregard in which they hold creative people is so total and so complete. Producers, that is, people like Ted Delaney, who is the equivalent of Bob Klein. I mean, they are opposite numbers. He may be Canadian, but he is the same as Bob Klein.
What about Trumbull and Zeitman at this stage?
Well, Trumbull is down in the United States. He's on other projects. Zeitman is running around trying to act like a producer, and he isn't doing diddly shit. Okay? Trumbull is about to come up and start building the ship, the models. Okay? But he hasn't yet. He's on other things. He had been up there and had looked at the facilities, the CFTO studios, and he was very enthused about them. So I figured, okay, it's going to work out. Now they got me in this room. Not only am I meeting with writers constantly, not only am I having these dumb meetings where they're giving me various dicta one after another, but they want me to write the first script while I'm sitting there. I said, well, I need a typing table. Do you know it took them 5 days to get me a table? And even then, it was the wrong height. I had to sit on telephone books. I mean, I'm a dwarf to begin with, right? But I still had to sit on telephone books. Couldn't get me a typewriter I wanted. I said, I want a manual typewriter. They could not get me a manual typewriter. I can't work on an electric typewriter.
Me either.
I can't. The goddamn thing goes off like a machine gun when I rest my fingers on it. They couldn't get me one. I wanted an Olympia office standard. They couldn't find one in the entire country of Canada. I said, send to Germany. Get me one. They couldn't. In 10 days up there, I wrote 6 pages. Now that is no rate for me. I can write 1 act of a teleplay in a day. I can write 10,000 words in a night if I have to. I mean, if I'm pressed, I can do it. And they'll be good. They may not be the greatest writing in the world, but they'll be competent enough to shoot. Okay? I was being driven madder and madder and madder. The writers start coming back with the ideas that I've given them. They look like spinach. I'm telling them over at the studio, I'm saying, God damn it. These people are having trouble. I need an assistant. I need someone to help me with these things. No, we can't hire an assistant. We're over budget now, blah, 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 blah. The only guys who were nice to me while I was there was a guy named Larry Herzog, who worked for the CTV network, who took me under his wing. Fantastic guy. He kept me from going insane. I swear to you. He took me out to dinner every night. You know, we went out and we'd go to Chinatown and eat. And a man named Murray Cherkover, who is the head of the CTV network. I mean, he's like Sarnoff up there. He is a gentleman, fantastic guy, because at this point, I got word I was up on charges from the Writers Guild, which is serious. I mean, nothing funny about that. As you may know, there were people who were fined $50,000 and expelled from the guild, and that's bad. And I get really pissed off, and I ask them if they'll hold off having bringing it up before the council until I get back. I was supposed to be back in a few days. They wouldn't. I sent a scathing telegram, furious with them, my own guild. I mean, if I was at least happy with my series, it would be worth it. But I'm not. You know, I'm in great misery. Ben Bova comes up at that point, and we realize that we are going to have to plot out every single one of the scripts ourselves. Every one of them from the get-go. So we begin plotting them out and putting them on cassettes and talking them. and talking to the writers just the way we are now and saying, look, what you've done on this thing is such and such and such, and you're a nice guy, but for Christ's sake, you don't know anything about biology, so get yourself a good book on biology and do such and such, or learn to spell. My God, you must spell these words correctly, you know. Okay, we had gotten in some treatments. They wanted me to have 12 stories in work by the time I left. Okay? They never sent the cassettes to the writers. They transcribed them. From this, the Canadian writers got the feeling that I had been bad-rapping them and saying that they didn't know how to write, they didn't know how to spell, blah, 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 blah. Now, whereas on a cassette I could say to a guy, look, Fred, look, we talked about this yesterday afternoon. Now, God damn it, man, you got to do, you know, that's, you know, you're talking to a friend and saying it. When it's written on a piece of paper, it doesn't look that way. They never sent the cassettes. So now the Canadian writers are getting, Bill Davidson is spreading Bill Davidson is the producer that they had hired, this jerk. They're spreading the word that I'm bad-mouthing the Canadian writers. Now I'm supposed to come back to L.A. on a Sunday morning. On Saturday night, my brother-in-law calls me from Miami, Florida, and my mother tells me, my mother, who is 76, 77 years old, is terminal. She's about to die. Says, better get down here fast. She's going. She's not going to live out the day. That's it. I call them up. I say, I've got to go back tomorrow. My mother's dying. The next morning, a man named Arthur Weinthal, who is the liaison between the CTV network and Glen Warren Productions, CFTO Studios, comes into my room, and I'm packing my bag. I'm packing. I'm going, baby. I'm going. He begins hitting the desk and saying, this is what you will do. You will stay here for another week, and you will write this script. You will put into work 12 more stories. You will work with the 12 writers you've got in work now. You will this, you will that, you will the other thing. I say to him, I don't want this to come as a shock to your nervous system, my man, but my mother is dying, and I'm going. He says, we can't be concerned with that. I says, well, I'm going to tell you what you can be concerned with. You got 6 seconds to get your ass out of this room, or I put you through the fucking window into that swimming pool down below. You got that? He goes. I said, we got some cassettes here with some stories on them. Do you want them? I don't care what you do with them. I said, that's it then. He says, that's it. I said, I'm off the project. You're off the project. I said, my own project, I'm off it. You're off it. I said, fine, I pull the project tomorrow. I haven't signed any contract yet. There was still no contract signed, and I still had no money. The only money I'd gotten had been travel money and expense money while I'd been in Canada for what I'd been doing there, right? I mean, I was supposed to be story editor and get, you know, weekly money and all like that. He says, I don't care. He goes away. 15 minutes later, as I'm finishing packing the bag, the phone rings. That's Preston Fisher, F-I-S, who had come in from New York and was there all along, and who had been the one who had sent him over to tell me that I would do this and I would do that. They said, well, blah, 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 what will you do? I said, what I will do is I will go see my mother, and then I will have a script for you by Thursday. I will write 4 acts of this script by Thursday, your pilot script. No, we have to have it tomorrow. I said, you're not getting it tomorrow. That's it. So I won my way, such as it was. Went back to L.A., saw my mother. Went to Florida, saw my mother, came back. Wrote the script. Phoenix Without Ashes, I called it. All of the titles of every one of the scripts had a mythological bent. Lazarus from the Mist, Children of Medusa, Goddess to the XX chromosome, Prometheus, something, I don't know, but all of them were like that. Nice stories. One of them was even how Rachel loses her virginity. See, the basic idea of the series was that Garth was to follow them. That Garth doesn't join up with them, Garth tracks them. And he wants to get the girl back. He doesn't love the girl, she doesn't love him, but he has to bring her back because his society says so. They destroyed that in the first show. Anyhow, I wrote Phoenix Without Ashes. I will happily let you see the script anytime, and you can give your listeners an idea of how good or bad the script is. If I were to die tomorrow and go to the pearly gates, I would rest my case on that script. It's that good. Sent it to them. They loved it. Terrific. 2 days later, we got some problems with it. What are the problems? Well, blah, 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 blah. We don't think the people should talk like Amish. We don't understand this. We don't want that. We don't like this. We can't do that. We don't want the other. I said, hey, look, now begins some of the most imbecilic. By this time, I had come back, and I did not want to be story editor anymore. I would not be story editor. I said, forget that. I walked away from something like $85,000. $85,000. That's a lot of bread. I walked away from all that. But I was still supposed to write 5 more scripts, 6 more scripts, something like that. They begin rewriting me. They begin telling me what they're going to do. Oh, wait. One more side note, which is fascinating. They were very high on a writer named Norman Clenman. They were high on Mr. Clenman because Mr. Clenman had left Canada to write American TV. I could not remember anything Mr. Clenman had written, and his name was not familiar to me, but they told me how good he was. They wanted him to write for the series because he was equipped to write American TV, but he was a Canadian. So he was acceptable to the Canadian content people in the Ottawa offices, right? Clenman calls me from Vancouver the day I got back, and he says, Mr. Ellison, this is Norman Clenman. I said, Mr. Clenman, I'm very happy to talk to you. I'm writing the script right now. What can I do for you? He says, I've read your presentation. I find it very difficult to understand. I really don't understand it, and very, very, very difficult to handle. He said, I don't know anything about science fiction. I want you to know that. He says, but if you want to train me to write this, I will be happy to write for you on this series, but you'll have to pay me the top of the show that American Guild is getting now, right? The American Guild, we were over the strike at this point. I said, well, look, Mr. Clenman, I got to write a script right now. I haven't got time to train you. I'll talk to you, as soon as I can. When you get back in the States, call me. Norman Clenman is the man they hired to be the story editor who rewrote my first script. The man who said he did not understand science fiction and thought my presentation was very difficult to understand. Okay? So now I'm back in the States. Clenman has been hired. I'm supposed to write more scripts. They begin giving me phone calls. The phone calls are such as this. Ring. Yeah. Hello. Harlan? Yes. Bill Davidson up in Toronto. Hello, Bill. What's the matter? We got serious problem. Serious problem. What's the problem, Bill? Oh, the problem is very, very serious. Yeah, I know, but what is the problem? Well, we find that we can't shoot Doug Trumbull's biospheres at 50 miles. Everything gets very hazy on the horizon. I said, that's what things are supposed to do on the horizon, get very hazy. He said, yeah, but it gets all muddy. You can't see what anything is. So we're going to have to make the biospheres on the spaceship 6 miles in diameter instead of 50. I said, well, Jesus, if you do that, I said, it's going to mean rewriting half the pilot script because at one point he hides out in the hills. I said, if a 50-mile biosphere, you can hide out in the mountains. I said, in a 6-mile biosphere, all you have to do is link hands and walk across it, for Christ's sake. I said, it's not logical. Oh, no one will know the difference, don't I said, yes, people will know the difference. They'll realize that it isn't logical. And you must have a rigorous interior logic in science fiction. It's not like a Western or a detective story where you can, fidget and play Mickey Mouse. Well, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. And then it suddenly dawned on me. I said, wait a minute. I said, you're photographing something no one has ever seen before, a biosphere. Everything looks like mud on television anyhow. I said, shoot de facto 6 miles if you want to and tell them it's 50. Who the hell's going to know the difference? Who can tell the difference between 6 miles and 50 miles? When you're looking at it on a television screen. He says, I never thought of that. I said, goodbye, Bill. Next phone call was he says to me, you're going to love one of the sets we're building. We're building the bridge. I said, you're building the bridge? What are you building the bridge for? You don't need it till the 4th or 5th year of the series. That's the Maltese Falcon. That's what they have to find to get the ship back on course. Oh, no, it's right in your presentation, right in your Bible there. I said, it's in there because that was to tell you where the series was going at the end. What they have to find are the engines, the drive chambers, the central computer banks, and the bridge. The bridge is the Maltese Falcon. Once they find the bridge, the series is over. Oh, no, they then have to find the backup bridge. I said, Bill, do you know what a backup bridge is? The backup controls? He said, no, what is it? I said, it's when your primary fails, it's your secondary, dummy! And then if they find that, that's nothing! Oh, I didn't know that. I said, well, then why didn't you call Ben Bova and ask him? I didn't think of it. We're awfully busy up here. Not enough paper clips. We had to do a lot of business on... I said, don't build the bridge. You don't need it for 4 years. If you're pressed for money now and you're building the goddamn bridge, you're wasting money. Oh, okay. They went ahead and built the bridge and put it not only in the first episode, but it's the very first shot of the thing, right? So in other words, the series is over the instant they open it, down the tube. Just like that. Well, it went on and on like that. When I saw what they were doing to the script, I said, I will give you no more scripts. I will deliver no more scripts. I do not want my work fucked up anymore. Phoenix Without Ashes was retitled, and when people say, what did they do to your series? This is the clearest example. Phoenix Without Ashes, which is a nice title, was retitled The Voyage of Discovery. Does that sparkle? Does that burn? Does that compel you with its urgency? Huh? They screwed up the characters. They changed everything. I mean, the Amish society they were supposed to come from, I mean, they had them wearing weird kind of clothes. I mean, the Amish, to my certain knowledge, have not changed their clothing styles in 400 years, and they had them wearing these weird, peculiar outfits. They broke logic constantly and consistently. I mean, they got a big door sitting... I had the hatch that he falls through hidden in the ground, and he stumbles over it by accident in a shrubbery. They got it up on a wall. Beyond this point lies death, right? And no one was ever curious enough in 900 years to go through there, right? Not only that, but there's an old man sitting there. What does the old man do? He says, I don't know what's going on back there, but it's evil, evil, right? Not only that, but they never showed the script to Ben, who was supposed to be the science consultant. And the first episode, which they just mucked up awfully, has some schlep saying, we are plunging into a solar star. A solar star, friends. For those of you who are sitting out there in radio land looking perplexed, let me tell you, a solar star is the only kind of star. Solar means sun, means star. Star means sun. So what they were saying is, he's a nice fella guy. I live in a big house home. Oh, look at my car automobile. Do you understand now? Solar star is illiterate gibberish, only superseded in stupidity and illiteracy by some of the subsequent things. For instance, in Lazarus from the Mist, where we had a guy revived, he was supposed to be dying of cancer, a heart attack. He had a coronary, and he was going to die. No, they don't want to have a coronary. Why? At 7 o'clock. No, not good at 7. What? People don't have heart attacks at 7 o'clock? What's the matter? Who's it going to offend? The heart attack patients? You know, Christ. So they made it into radiation plague. Radiation plague. Ben Bova said to them, there is no such thing as radiation plague. You can't have a radiation plague. And he gave them 12 other alternatives that they could have used. Did they do it? No. On the series, some guy says, I'm dying from radiation plague. Right? There was also a terrific... I never saw this, but people call me up and laugh at me because they think I wrote it. They say, hey, dummy, somebody was sick with space senility. Space senility. What is space senility? It's like old space, doddering old space. Hello there, I'm an old space. I'm sorry. Right? That's like a solar star as opposed to a movie star, right? God knows. Anyhow, Ben Bova sent them a he saw his first episode, I think last week, sent them a telegram, said, take my name off it. He doesn't want to be associated with it. When I saw what they had done to the script, said, take my name off it. You will not use my name. Now they get furious. We want to use your name because the Star Trek people know about your credentials and they know that you've been written for Star Trek, and we need that to promote it. I said, up your tuchus, Charlie. You ain't using my name no-how. Huh? So I took my name off and I put on it my pseudonym, which I've only used twice before on television, Cordwainer Bird. The bird is as in flipping the or for the. Right? Anyhow, when they heard that, they went bananas. You can't use that! You can't use that! I said, oh, yes, I can. It's registered with the Writers Guild and it's in my contract. Just check it out. They checked it out and they had to use it. Every week, folks, you will see Cordwainer Bird's The Starlost. I have nothing to do with the series. I want nothing to do with it. I don't watch it myself. I just wouldn't watch it. I get furious when I do watch it. It is directed by people who have no sense of direction. It is the slowest goddamn talkie show. Doug Trumbull was booted off the show. Magicam never worked. Never worked. That's all the Canadians' production techniques that you're seeing there. The whole goddamn thing looks like it was shot inside one of those plastic egg crates. They stand on a wide vista, and you can see it's a painted backdrop right behind them. Keir Delay mumbles in his beard. Bill Davidson directs, out of his left ear. And if they say that it's getting the highest ratings in the universe, I imagine those remarks are coming from Mr. Robert Klein, who, if he told me the sun was shining, I would go out and check. And that's pretty much where it stands at this point.
One more loose end.
Why don't you take some phone calls?
All right, I want to tie up one more loose end. How do you stand with the Guild?
Oh, yeah. The Guild, I went up on trial. They did bring me to trial. and all charges were dismissed. I was tried by a jury of I guess it was 5 or 6 very prestigious writers who were members of the guild themselves, and all charges were dismissed.
Have you been paid by anybody yet?
Have I been paid by anybody yet? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what he asked.
Yeah, I had to really grind them for the money. And the way I ground them for the money was by threatening them with bad rapping them. And they paid me the money, and as you can see, I am not bad rapping them. I learned at their knee. If I am a rotten, vile person, it is because I learned from them.